Not gonna lie, my eyeshadow is a little bit on point today, so here is some eyeshadow appreciation. Happy New Year! I know this is most likely coming to you a little bit late, but I hope that I edit and upload this at a reasonable time. I haven't actually filmed for quite a while. I am filming this in January 2023. It is the new year, and I wanted to just go over all the books that I ended up reading in the year of 2022. It was most definitely one of the most disappointing years in terms of reading because I only ended up finishing 7 books, which I guess for some people is a lot, but for me it was actually under my reading challenge. I challenged myself to read 20 books, which I thought that I would do. Kind of disappointing, but I did manage to get a few books that I've been meaning to read for a while off my TBR, so I guess in that sense it was kind of a success, and I've had some pretty good reads last year. So without further ado, let's get on with the video. Also, this is a dress that I recently got from Gorman and I am absolutely in love with it. Colourful, if you didn't know already. I like a bit of colourful clothing, so here's some appreciation for my fashion choices. So the first book that I ended up finishing in the month of January was Tender is the Flesh. This is by Agustina Bazterrica. I do not know if I said her name correctly, but she is an Argentinian author. This is a translated work of fiction. I absolutely loved this book. It's quite disturbing. Let me just tell you what this one is about, and then you can consider whether you want to pick it up or not. But if you want quite a, I suppose, a thought-provoking book while set in a... Nah, this is never gonna happen. This world will never happen. Who knows though, who knows? Firstly, I realized that I'm not the biggest fan of translated works because I feel like some things just get lost in translation and can be read slightly, I don't know, awkward. This kind of had that feeling. It just kind of read a little bit off, but it kind of worked for the tone of this book. Let me just tell you about this book already because it's kind of crazy. It's basically set in a world, wait, I don't even know what year it's set in. Does it even say? Honestly, I don't remember. It's been over a year. Kind of vague on the specifics, but it's somewhere set in the near future in a world where there's been like a virus pandemic that affected all animals, and so essentially all animals have become poisonous, therefore affecting the meat industry, so you can't consume any animal byproducts. Obviously set in a dystopian future. It's kind of messed up. The tone of the book is definitely bleak and lifeless. You're following this guy who originally owned a meat slaughter factory, and essentially the government or society itself decided to make a new form of meat, and let me just say cannibalism is involved. We follow a man who owns a meat factory from way back before this virus outbreak, and so all these meat factories have converted to processing special meat, which is essentially humans, and they're breeded accordingly. They don't call them humans because that's a big no-no in the world. They're not treated as if they're humans. They're treated as animals, essentially cattle. It is highly disturbing. It's following this man on his day-to-day life, and slowly through this guy's point of view, you understand the system that's been placed, the processes of how they essentially slaughter. I don't want to say more because it's quite an experience, and I don't want to say that I'm messed up in my head, but I kind of do like reading about messed up stories like this, and so it was actually pretty intense. I felt sick to my stomach in some moments, but I powered through. It's fine. Has not converted me to veganism or vegetarianism. I'm sorry, I'm Korean, I eat meat, but it's definitely got me a little bit more icky about the meat industry, and so yes, very interesting perspective. The way the book ends, it's quite tragic and sad. Basically, our main protagonist, he's caring for his father who has dementia. I think his wife has left him. I don't know if she's divorced him or not, but he's currently living alone in his place, and he's quite a successful businessman in terms of his factory. He's pretty high up in his position, so he's doing well for himself, but he kind of sees the world in this very almost depressing view. He's living a pretty monotonous life, but one day he's gifted this special specimen, aka human, of the highest quality. At first, of course, he's treating her as if you're taking care of an animal. However, over time, he slowly questions his views on this meat product. He slowly treats this person as if they're human. He kind of questions the old ways of life, because obviously he was around before this virus outbreak happened, and so he does know about the past, but now he's living in this new system, this new world. There's like a mental turmoil that he goes through. It's a very personal journey, and you just see the world through the main character's lens. It is dark, it is bleak. There seems to be no hope in this world, and just the way it ends, it's quite a dark and tragic kind of ending. So you're kind of left thinking, just whoa, that was dark. I don't know what it is, but it did it for me. It was both disturbing, it had a mystery aspect to it. It was also kind of bleak and kind of what I didn't need in the month of Jan, start of the new year, but it kind of worked. I really appreciated it, and it was probably one of my favorite reads, if not my favorite read of the year, because we have just gone through a pandemic. I feel like the world that this author built, there is that relatable quality to it. I doubt that society would ever devolve into this, but it did make me question the meat industry itself, and just the whole process of it was very interesting, and it made me contemplate about life. Also, the main character, totally unlikable. I mean, I do like when he does go through that turmoil and he questions humanity and what society is, how he judges his family, how they've just adjusted into this new world, and all these questions. I did like his turmoil, but at the end of the day, this system is already in place, and so even though there is this questioning, this longing for the old world and this sort of disgust for the new world, inevitably you can't change it. It's definitely dark. It's not a happy read by any means. There are a lot of disturbing imagery, quite graphic, so trigger warning if you can't handle graphic content, but if you think you can handle it, I would highly recommend this book. It just made me question life, humanity, or the lack thereof, and just how brutal humans can be in a hypothetical situation that is the setting of this story. So it's an intense read. However, it's quite short. It's kind of like a slice of life situation where you're just with the characters on their day-to-day lives. So it's definitely a slower paced story, but it kept me engaged the whole time. It's more so kind of looking at the world through the eyes of someone who's somewhat adjusted to the new ways of living. Social norms have completely gone out the window. It definitely left quite an impression on me. I would recommend this book if you can get past graphic, violent imagery of butchering people. I would say that this is pretty much a horror book. It's definitely got an interesting premise. It's very morbid, no likable characters, but it's not really a character study, more so a study on society. I thought it had a very unique concept, and it's more so the concept and the world that really intrigued me, and just the way people, humans, have adjusted to this way of living and just ignore the fact that they are eating human meat. It's got a very interesting insight into the meat world, and if you really change all the animals that we eat on a day-to-day basis to human meat, imagine, just think about it. It's kind of disturbing. So yes, superb. I really loved it. It really left me just thinking about life. I would recommend it. I ended up giving this book 4 stars out of 5 on Goodreads. It's one of my favorite, if not my favorite read of the year 2022. So there you go. We're gonna move on to the next book. I've been talking about this for way too long. Joke's on you. The first book that I finished was actually Lips Touched 3 times over Tender as the Flesh, sorry. But anyway, this was also finished in the month of Jan. This is a collection of short stories by Laini Taylor, one of my favorite YA authors. I find that she has very lyrical and beautiful writing. Sam, what is going on? I just find that her concepts are quite unique, but she has a way with words that's just very lyrical and beautiful to read, and so I'm obsessed. I would say that these stories were nice, if nice is the best word that I can use, but I wouldn't say that I was blown away by these short stories. I found that each stories were very unique. I actually really liked the first story, which, oh, by the way, oh my gosh, love how this is signed. I remember getting my friend to actually go to a book signing because I couldn't make it. I think I was working or something. This makes me smile. Oh my gosh. I kind of wish that I met her in real life, but maybe one day she'll come back to Sydney. Oh yes, The Goblin Fruit. Also, this book has really beautiful illustrations throughout it, as you can. It had a pretty tragic, sad ending. Maybe I'm just a fan of tragic and sad endings. Each story had its own little twisted, dark take, as Laini Taylor likes to, you know, present her stories. I will say though, I had a little bit more of a higher expectation. Those expectations were not really met, even though I wasn't like over the moon about this short story collection. Let me just tell you that Illumicrate had released a special edition of it, so I ended up purchasing it, and oh my gosh, this edition, let me just say, is stunning. Excuse me? Sorry, a slight little detour. Can you see the beauty of this book? Oh my god. And oh my gosh, this illustration just makes me so happy. It's so beautiful. I just saw this and I was like, ooh, I read that book at the beginning of the year and I relatively enjoyed myself with the story, and so I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna splurge. I'm just gonna buy myself another edition. No regrets. Anyway, going back to my thoughts and feels, I thought that each story had a unique take. I would say that it had like a dark twist to all of her stories, and I appreciated it. I love a bit of a dark twist to some fantastical tales. Each story has something to do with lips touching. I thought it would be a bit more sensual, but you know, there was a more darker take slash was not sensual at all. All I can say is that I enjoyed it. These short stories are quite breezy to get by, and so you would finish it relatively quickly. I just kind of read it in between books, and so I did read this one a bit slower. I ended up giving this collection of stories 3 stars out of 5 on Goodreads. I thought it was more on the average side, but I did like the twisted tales. Laini Taylor has a very dreamlike quality to her storytelling, and I'm obsessed with that. Even though I didn't resonate a lot with all of the stories in this collection, I still liked my reading experience. I don't know. I think it's something to do with the writing, just the way she tells the story. It's very almost fairy tale-like, but twisted. The next book that I ended up reading in the month of Jan, oh my gosh, I read 3 books in Jan and I can't even finish 1 book in Jan this year. Let's not dwell on that. The next book that I finished was Vespertine by yours truly, Margaret Rogerson, one of my favorite writers. In terms of YA fiction, I think she's only done YA fiction. You know what? Whatever book she releases, I'm all in. I will say this is probably my least favorite story written by her, but again, it's got a very cool concept, original concept. I was very excited for it. Honestly though, after reading this, I'm like, just give me a sequel to Sorcery of Thorns, please, please. Make it a duology, don't make it a standalone. However, she's making this one into a series, which I'm like, not that interested. This one is obviously set in a fantasy setting once again, but the world itself has a very unique magic system. Our main character is a nun, and in this world, nuns have like these special abilities. They have these special relics and stuff that hold ancient spirits, devils, I don't know, powerful beings. I would say that the magic system is very unique in comparison to any other fantasy books that I've read, and it deals with a lot of necromancy, and so I found that aspect very interesting. But like I said, I wasn't like the biggest fan of this book, although because it is Margaret Rogerson, I just loved her writing. Like Laini Taylor, she does have almost a dreamlike quality to her storytelling, and so I was just along for the journey. I think without giving away too much about the plot itself, itself, it's got quite a lot of various things going on, and I can tell that this is going to be a series because certain things weren't really wrapped up, but at the same time I feel like this first book, it kind of wraps up pretty nicely, so it could potentially be a standalone, but there are other things in terms of world building where it wasn't exactly wrapped up. Okay, there is a bit of action that happens at the very beginning, but I would say that it kind of slows down in the middle and then it picks back up towards the end. The end climax to the story was a little rushed, not gonna lie. I didn't really like any of the characters aside from our main character. Oh no, there were some of the nuns that I did like, and I did like the dynamic because this book has that trope of being what's that trope called, where the main character is possessed by another entity, and so they have that kind of bickering banter, and it's almost like a friendship, unwilling alliance kind of situation, and so I did like that aspect. At the same time, the story, it kind of dragged. It kind of got a little confusing as well, what was happening politically in the world. It kind of did remind me of A Shadow Bright and Burning, which was another fantasy book. It gave me those vibes, but aside from like the bickering and bantering between the possessed spirit within her as well as the interesting magic system, aside from those two, because those were the best aspects of the book, I thought the story itself was a little slow. As much as I thought nuns being badass was a cool concept, in hindsight after reading the book, it wasn't that interesting. But if I've learned anything from any of Margaret Rogerson's stories, she focuses on the mood and tone of her stories rather than making a very dense, well put together world story, which I usually like in fantasy, but with her I give her leeway because I just want to be swept up in the dreamlike quality of her writing and just following characters along their journey. But I don't know, there's something about this story that I didn't really click with, so I ended up giving Vespertine 3 stars out of 5 on Goodreads. I would say, again, very average in comparison to her other books that I absolutely loved. I mean, they're not by any means the stories of the highest quality, but there's something about the way she writes her stories. It's just very comforting. Kind of got that a little bit with this one, but I was a little bit disappointed in terms of the story aspect. The way it progressed, the pacing of the book was all over the place, and so didn't really appreciate that. But honestly though, because it's Margaret Rogerson, I will definitely be picking up her next book regardless, so whatever. Okay, moving on to the next book that I read. The one and only book that I read in Feb was The Last Graduate by Naomi Novik. This is the sequel to the Scholarman series, quickly becoming a series that I really love. I actually do own the 3rd book right now. I haven't delved into it yet. I'm currently trying to finish one of my other books and it's taking a while. It's really frustrating. I'm kind of on a book slump right now. Don't want to talk about it. The Last Graduate, a solid sequel. I don't want to say too much about this book in terms of the story itself because obviously it's a sequel, and if you guys haven't read the first book then whatever, but this series is essentially, so far, is set in a school. So you're following a character who's prophesized to be the ultimate villain, like destroyer of worlds kind of situation, and so she's been prophesized for being this very powerful and dangerous person, and so she's a very cynical character and love her, and she's basically thrown into, well, not thrown, every magical person, like this story has kind of been duped a Hogwarts setting, but extremely dangerous, more so than Hogwarts, because let's be real, Hogwarts was pretty dangerous for kids to be wandering around in. That school was terrifying. It's obviously another fantasy book series set in a school. Like the whole book, you don't actually see anyone from the outside world because it starts from when our main character is like her 3rd year into this magic school, and so you're kind of thrusted straight into someone who's cynical and has lived in this school for quite a while, so they know how the system works, and you just observe just how deadly the school is. And it's got a very interesting premise because the school has no teachers, so basically the school itself is almost a character, but the way it's done is through independent learning. So all the students are responsible for their own learning in the school, and also there are these monsters and stuff constantly trying to kill the students, and most of the time very successful in killing students. Because she's like a prophesized evil person. She's very good at surviving. There's a lot of funny moments. It just continues on to this sequel, but obviously in this sequel they're in senior years, so graduate year, hence The Last Graduate. There's definitely different hierarchies, so obviously more poshy students who come from like higher society in the sorcerer world, they obviously have certain privileges, and also the way you survive in the school is by being a part of a group, and so you need to make alliances, and so the more preppy people that you align with, you're more likely to survive. But there's this whole system in place, and it's just very interesting how the hierarchy works in the school. There's another guy in the school that's like the typical heroic type who's always willing to save everyone. It's just such a funny situation. But I will say that dude, suspicious, because he kind of gives me like insane vibes. I feel like he's gonna be a bad person for some reason. That's just the vibe that I get. This is completely my own theory. I don't think our main character, even though it prophesies to be this big bad, honestly I don't think so. I feel like there's some twisting tale of that prophecy. Maybe it's the dude that's the typical hero that's gonna be the big bad. That's just my theory. Anyway, the way I'm talking about this book is way too chaotic right now, probably not making any sense, but let's just say it's set in a deadly school. That's why the first book is called A Deadly Education. Very on the nose. I would say that the concept's very interesting. There's quite a diverse range of characters, and I do like how the school has magic users from around the world, and so there are people that are speaking different languages. Even though this series gets crap for being too heavy on the world building, I wish there was a little more emphasis on like the different diverse characters. Obviously we need to focus on our core characters, but it was interesting to see other characters from other parts of the world. I kind of wish that there were more emphasis on other characters. I did like the dynamic of the alliances. Elle and Orion are essentially the main characters, and so, you know, I love their dynamic. But however, in this book, I feel like that relationship was not in the foreground of the story at all in the sequel, so I'm hoping that comes to play in the third book. I'm very excited for the third book, and I'll definitely get to it this year. Very unique. I loved it. It is definitely heavy on the world building, and if you just want to focus on characters and plot and story, you will somewhat get that in this series, but it is very, very heavy in the world building. So if you love world building and just delving into the life of these characters and the intricate details of the world, this is the story for you, because it delves right into the nitty-gritty details of the world, the system, the magic, and the monsters. So I very much appreciated that, because I love the setting of the world, this crazy weird school that just like changes and shifts, and it's dangerous, but I also really love the dynamic of the characters with each other. The whole alliance thing that I said, I love that kind of social hierarchy situation. Also love our main character. She's a sassy biatch, and I am here for it. So maybe the first book I liked a little bit better, but I still enjoyed it. I ended up giving this book 4 stars out of 5 on Goodreads. Highly enjoyed it. Very excited to continue on with this series, and I would recommend this series for anyone who wants to get into fantasy but doesn't want to, you know, have a whole like world to explore. This is a very contained story within a contained setting. If you like the sound of a magical school setting that's very dangerous, there's monsters and magic and people are learning things, would recommend. I don't even know if this is a trope, but I do like when characters are prophesized to be this very evil character, but they want to go against that. In this case, she's kind of given up. She's like, yes, I'm a villain. What of it? Leave me alone. Even though she's somewhat accepted her fate as being this world destroyer, she's also very reluctant to act on that and holds herself back a lot. That just shows her good intentions. So like, I don't know if I trust that prophecy, but I do like her sassy attitude throughout this series so far. Love her. Excited. Anyway, let's move on. After I finished The Last Graduate, let me just say I struggled. I struggled to get through the next book that I have here, and it is A Winter's Promise by, who is this by again? Christelle Dabos. So the author is French. It's translated fiction once again. What is new? Although I feel like for once in my life I read a translated fiction where I don't feel that awkwardness. I feel like the translation for this was seamless. This is obviously another fantasy series. This is the first book in the Mirror Visitor series. This book has a very unique premise. Essentially something happened to the world and there are now cities in the sky. We follow our main character who has a very unique ability within her city, and she's able to not only travel through mirrors, but she's also able to touch objects and know the history behind it, all the history behind the object that she touches. And so that is a very unique ability to have. Very early on, she is married off to a person who lives in a city far, far away from her own. And so she basically gets swept off into this new world that's very cold, kind of reminiscent of Russia. I think it's very Russian inspired, the city that she goes to. If you look at this book cover, this is supposed to represent how the cities are built. So it's this big city in the sky on like a spiral thing. Once she gets there, her husband-to-be, her fiance, is very cold and distant, and it's one of those tropes where it's kind of like almost enemies to lovers, but there is no lovers aspect so far that I can see. I mean, there's a brief moment of caring that I witnessed in this book, but not really. I mean, he's very cold and also not in the book that much. There's a heavy emphasis on politics. So you're following Ophelia. Her fiance is like the treasurer of this world and is hated by everyone. The world itself was very whimsical, very mysterious, very magical. Definitely took me to another world and really swept me off my feet, and that aspect I really love. I was along for the ride. Going into it, I thought that it would have more heavy emphasis on like the romance between Ophelia and her betrothed, but honestly that was not in the forefront of the story. It's more so her exploring the world, and she's always in danger because people know of this dude that everyone hates being betrothed to someone, and so everyone is always on the lookout for who that person is, which is Ophelia. So for a big portion of the book she's in hiding. The storyline was definitely very different from what I was expecting, but honestly I liked it because it kind of built the foundation to the world and the story, the setting. And so now when I read the sequel, hopefully we can progress in the story aspect. Hopefully. I very much enjoyed this book eventually, even though it took a while to read, and was very excited to continue on with the sequel. And so yes, I ended up giving this book 4 stars out of 5 once again. I enjoyed the world itself rather than the characters and the plot line. Hopefully the characters go somewhere, the plot line goes somewhere in the sequels, because I know that this is a quartet, so there's 4 books in the series, so we shall see if I continue to love this series. So far the first book is pretty strong. Recommend if you want something a little bit different, unique, a little bit whimsical, you like the wintry setting, would recommend. This imagery of the book cover is just so cute. As I was reading it, because the cities in the sky kind of remind me of BioShock Infinite, and I love that game, so anything that kind of reminds me of that I'm just really into. So liked it, intrigued to continue on with the sequel. The last book that I wanted to talk to you about is Dune by Frank Herbert. This is not the copy that I read from actually. I ended up listening to this via audiobook, which I might add wasn't the best way. I decided to hold this edition up because I find that this edition is so stunning. Oh my gosh, the teal sprayed edges. I just wanted something physical to hold up. Honestly, I kind of want to reread Dune. I did start it the year before and it was a real struggle for me to get through. I restarted reading it like 2 or 3 times. It just was a bit of a struggle because I rarely read science fiction, and so it was a little bit more difficult for me to get into. And of course the world, the politics, and just the dynamics of where the characters are. There's a whole dense history and political intrigue that is involved with this story that was pretty dense. The one problem is, because I read it via audiobook, it didn't actually process into my mind, into my brain as well. And so as much of a success it was for me to, you know, tick this off my bucket list of books to read, I wasn't listening properly. Like, my mind drifted a bit. I don't even think I technically read the book properly. There were moments in the last like quarter of the book that I don't really remember what was going on. So I kind of feel bad. I ended up rating Dune 4 stars out of 5 solely based on the complex detail of the world. It has that chosen one trope. This is an older read, but I think Frank Herbert really created a complex story. It was very dense, but it was actually still readable. That was the thing. You know how science fiction, it can get very into the nitty-gritty of the details of very sciencey things. I was able to follow like the tech and the world. Maybe it's also because I love a good political intrigue regardless of whether it's a fantasy setting, science fiction setting, or modern day. Actually, modern day setting is a little boring. So whether it be a fantasy or a sci-fi setting, I'm always in for a good political intrigue storyline. Although I feel like after finishing it, a lot of plot lines were not wrapped up. And I know that this is a series, but I was expecting Dune, this first book, to completely wrap up its own story, because I know like the sequels go to further generations. I feel like giving it 4 stars out of 5 is inaccurate, because I mainly gave it a higher rating for the quality of the creation of Herbert's story. I don't know, maybe I was giving it a bit more leeway, but if I were to reread this, oh my gosh, it's gonna take forever. I don't know if I can handle rereading this book, because already reading it, listening to it once was such a difficult task for me. Maybe it's just like the thought of going through like this whole book again. Oh my gosh, there's a whole appendix this much. Now that I've technically read it, I'm happy to watch the sequel to Dune. I think it's coming out at the end of this year, right? I'm really excited. It was a really good adaptation. We follow Paul, our main character. He's the chosen one, the Messiah. This planet, it has spice, which is this element that's highly sought out. There's a whole aspect to it that's very intriguing. Wait, is it Bene Gesserit, Paul's mom? Like, she's part of this subcategory of sorcerers, essentially. Not really sorcerers, because this is a science fiction book, but essentially it gives me like sorcerer vibes. Anyway, they were so cool, so intimidating. The whole world of Dune was so, how should I say, immersive. I thought the plotline was very intriguing. I was engaged through the journey it took me on with Paul. It was just a very well written story, and so I love the political intrigue. They had very interesting aspects to the world that was very different from anything I've ever read. Then again, like I said, it does follow the typical chosen one trope, and so if you're not a fan of that, maybe you might not like this. I recognize why this is such a classic in science fiction literature, and so I think it is a book that you need to read once in your life. I don't know, I feel bad rating it 4 out of 5 stars, considering that I don't remember like the last half to quarter of it. Maybe I just have fond memories because I really enjoyed the movie adaptation, so maybe that's just helped me like this book even more. I definitely think that the book really delved further into the motivations of certain characters and really solidified what was going on with the different families of this world. And oh my gosh, when things go down, things go down. It's tragic, but there's also like this revenge quest going on. It's a whole thing. Like, the story was put together very well. So yeah, that's it for Dune. Wait, I thought I read Mistborn. Hold on. The Final Empire, which is part of the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson, finally got into the Cosme universe. Wait, is it Cosme? Yes, Cosme. This has been a book that has been on my TBR for like over a decade. And let me just say, expectations were high, because this was one of the books that were raved on about in BookTube many years ago, and so I really wanted to delve into Brandon Sanderson's more fantasy novels, because before this I read Steelheart and that series. I would consider that sci-fi rather than fantasy because it's set in like more modern day setting. I think this one, I definitely did like the dynamic between Vin and Kelsier, and I love how Vin is like a Mistborn. Let's just go with the magic system, because the magic system is really interesting, unique. Basically, you ingest certain types of metals and it gives you certain abilities. These abilities are forbidden. Like, it is set in a world where the Dark Ruler, wait, we're gonna just call him the Dark Lord. Basically, this evil dude who has been ruling for hundreds of years or thousands of years, I forget. Anyway, he's been ruling for a long time because he basically took over the world, and so this world is set in a very miserable setting. Everyone's miserable. Also, it's outlawed to have any of these abilities, and so people secretly have them but don't reveal them, because then they'll be executed or killed or be sent to plantations or whatever. And so it's a really bad situation. It's even worse if you are a Mistborn. So if you have the ability to harness all the abilities, so in just any types of metals, and be able to use that, you are a target for sure. This book was quite the adventure. It's like a heist novel with a ragtag group of rebels ready to try and overthrow this system. A lot of these people are in it for very selfish intentions. It was a long time coming for me to read this book. I will say my expectations were probably too high, but I'm really excited to continue on with the series, and I'm very intrigued where this plotline will go. And I loved following Vin. I think if anything, everyone really loves Kelsia, who is like kind of the leader of this group, but I really liked Vin. Vin is my gal. Loved following her story. I've been calling the main villain the Dark Lord, but he's called the Lord Ruler. Brandon Sanderson sets up a very interesting world, politics, and also the characters, and a very fast-paced storyline. Although I will say it was a little bit more slower to get into it. So the first half of it was a little bit slow, but once we were introduced to all the world, how the magic system works and how Vin gets trained to use her Mistborn abilities, that in itself was very good because it built the foundation. Like I said, some of the stuff that was lacking in some other books that I've been reading, but this first book did a really good job in introducing the setting and also introducing us to each of the characters, because it has a few different plot lines that you're following, but I am interested in all of them. Very curious on how this will all culminate into the finale in the end. I do know that the Mistborn series is going to be an ongoing series, so I'm a little bit scared about this, but I think this story in itself is just a trilogy, and then it gets onto the second trilogy that's set in the same world, but maybe it's just hundreds of years later, so whatever. Anyway, so I am intrigued. I'm so happy that I got to finish this. However, I will say that I was a little bit underwhelmed with the story. I did rate it 3 stars out of 5 on Goodreads, but I would say that it's more of a 3.5 stars. I definitely enjoyed it. It's just more so a little bit disappointing because I had certain expectations of how much I was gonna like this book because of all the hype. Even though years later I thought that hype would have died down in me, but I did still have this relatively high expectation. Hopefully this year I do continue on with a sequel. I honestly would recommend this to new fantasy readers because it is so easy to read, and Brandon Sanderson has a way with his words where he does build like a complex, relatively complex world, like fantasy world, where it's more established. He does have multiple characters that he follows, but it's written in a way that's very easily digestible. Kind of reads almost YA-ish, but it's definitely more in the adult fantasy category. So if you're going from YA to adult fantasy, I think this one would be the ideal choice. I'm definitely intrigued in continuing, and hopefully I fall more in love with the story, because right now I think my expectations were too high and I wasn't really disappointed, but more so underwhelmed. I don't know what's worse. So the last book that I want to focus on technically wasn't finished, so I'm not actually including this as a finished read, and it is this book. This, you might ask, what is it? It's The Book of Night by Holly Black, and let me just say it took me so long and I'm still reading it. Not that I'm hating the book so far, it's just really boring, and I'm very much disappointed, mainly because of her Folk of the Air series. Like, when I read those books, I flew through them. Like, I read them so quick. I was so engaged with the stories and the characters and the world, and I was so invested. I was invested in all aspects, and when I went into this book, I thought, you know what, it's a completely different story. It's nothing related to Folk of the Air. Completely new. I'm so intrigued and I am ready to read something new. Let's just say that disappointed is the word. The character that we follow is incredibly unlikable, and now I don't think that that in itself is off-putting to me, because I love following unlikable characters. If you have been watching my videos in the past, you know I'm a fan of unlikable people, but this girl is just not it for me. I don't know, I don't think I enjoy any of the characters. I don't even enjoy the plot line. The only aspect that I think is very intriguing is the magic of the world, like the whole thing about shadow magic. It's actually not shadow magic, so it's basically like how should I explain this? Like the fantastical aspect of the shadows, how people like manipulate them or people feed them and they can become their own entity and also can rip away from you. So there are some people existing in the world with no shadow. I don't know, I struggled with this one. I think the one thing that Holly Black needed to do to make me more invested was to create a more solid foundation in the world building, and Also, I feel bad saying this, but kind of a more interesting plotline to follow. There is this underlying mystery about her past that I was interested by. And also, you know what? At this point, I've been reading this book for so long. I'm so uninterested, but I'm forcing myself to read through it. Last night, it was an effort to even read like 1.5 chapters. Every time I pick this book up at night, I intend to read like 1 chapter, but I end up always falling asleep after like 3 pages. And it's always really frustrating because I wake up the next day with my book open and my bookmark nowhere to be found, and so I lose a page. I've been rereading certain chapters. It's been a mess, and at this point I'm very sick of reading this book, and I'm just okay. This one is unrated yet because I haven't finished it. Obviously, I'm including it in this video because I read it for the since August. Since I finished A Winter's Promise, I picked this book up and I hadn't finished it. That's half a year. It took me months and months, and it's already January. When recording this, it's January and I still haven't finished it. I am determined to finish it. I've been on a reading slump and it just sucks because it's a holy black book. It's easy to read and it's relatively short. I'm not enjoying it. You can already tell that I'm probably gonna rate this one pretty low. Sorry. So there you go. Those were all my reads of 2022. That is it for today, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. This was probably a very long-winded, very scatterbrained video, but I hope you guys enjoyed. Happy New Year once again. Hopefully in 2023, I get to read more books that I'm excited to share with you guys. And yeah, I hope you guys are all doing well. Stay safe and happy reading, everyone. Goodbye.